It began not with speeches or ceremonies, but with a sound. A midnight hum, sharp and unfamiliar, cut across the borderlands of Burkina Faso. In just 12 minutes, fire fell from the sky. Steel was twisted into ruin, and the silence of the night was shattered. This was no accident. It was a strike confirmed by the highest office of the land. President Ibrahim Traoré himself admitted the order, a declaration that a small Sahelian state would not bow quietly to hidden hands. For decades, drone warfare had been the monopoly of superpowers. But in that single night, a new chapter opened. A nation once dismissed as fragile showed that it could defend its sovereignty with the very tools once used to intimidate it. The world awoke not just to the news of an explosion, but to the possibility of a continent rewriting the rules of power. Stay with us. This is more than a headline. It is a hinge of history. Subscribe and witness how sovereignty is claimed, not begged. The question now burns brighter than the wreckage itself. Was this the first act of defense in a revolution, or the opening shot of a larger storm? The night of the strike did not arrive with warning. It crept in silence, broken only by the faint hum of machines circling above the borderlands of Burkina Faso. When the drones released their payloads, precision replaced mystery. Within minutes, a convoy of vehicles was reduced to smoking wreckage. For the world, the shock lay not only in the destruction, but in what followed. Confirmation from the presidential palace in Ouagadougou. This was not an accident. It was not a rogue unit. It was a decision made at the highest level by President Ibrahim Traoré. For the first time in the country's history, its leader stood before the world and admitted responsibility for a drone strike. The announcement changed the narrative overnight. No longer was Burkina Faso a passive player caught between external powers. In that moment, it became an active agent, declaring that sovereignty could be defended with force if necessary. What made the incident even more remarkable was the technology behind it. Intelligence analysts quickly identified the drone as a North Korean prototype, retrofitted with Russian navigation systems, and integrated into AI-SNET, the new encrypted security network linking Burkina Faso with Mali and Niger. It was not just hardware. It was a symbol of shifting alliances, a multipolar reality where African nations could develop, adapt, and deploy advanced tools once monopolized by the West. But the wreckage told a darker story. Among the twisted remains of the convoy were rifles stamped with American manufacturing codes, encrypted radios with French serial numbers, and resource maps printed in English. Even more unsettling were the Nigerian military ID tags discovered on site. The presence of such items suggested the convoy was no ordinary caravan. It was an operation stitched together from multiple corners of the globe. Investigators followed the money. Traces of financial transfers revealed shell companies registered in London, Paris, and Abu Dhabi. Over 75 million United States dollars had been channeled through these entities within just 6 months, funds believed to support destabilization campaigns in the Sahel. The paperwork contained code names whispered in diplomatic corridors, Falcon Hand and DC Handler, adding yet another layer of intrigue. Who were they? A pair of mercenary leaders? A cover for intelligence agencies? Or placeholders for networks far larger and more sophisticated than anyone had admitted? For the people of Burkina Faso, the discovery was both vindication and alarm. Vindication, because the strike proved that their government was neither blind nor powerless in the face of covert interference. Alarm because the evidence confirmed what many had long suspected, that their sovereignty was being undermined not only by mercenaries, but by hidden hands stretching across continents. Internationally, the reaction was immediate. Western capitals debated whether the strike was reckless provocation or a strategic deterrent. Analysts warned that if such tactics became common, billions of dollars in resource contracts across the Sahel could be jeopardized. Meanwhile, in Ouagadougou streets, the sentiment was different. Citizens saw their nation for once dictating terms, not accepting them. They spoke of dignity, of standing tall, of refusing to be pawns in someone else's game. The paradox was striking. To outsiders, this was a mystery, a puzzle of geopolitics and clandestine finance. To Burkina citizens, it was simple. Their president had chosen action over silence. He had struck not merely at a convoy, but at a structure of manipulation that had long drained Africa's wealth. And yet, beneath the flames and fragments, one question echoed louder than any victory chant. Who was the true architect of the convoy, and what was the real target of Operation Broken Spine? The smoke had barely cleared, but whispers already pointed to something far greater than a convoy, a billion-dollar refinery and the future of Burkina Faso's independence. From the ashes of the convoy came not silence, but revelation. Within hours of the strike, the presidential office released a phrase that electrified the region. If they send ghosts, we send thunder. It was not merely rhetoric. It was a doctrine in the making, a message to mercenaries and hidden powers that the age of impunity was over. The context soon became clear. Intelligence briefings revealed the chilling outline of a plot named Operation Broken Spine. Its target was no ordinary infrastructure, but the Kudu oil refinery, a project valued at over 1.3 billion United States dollars, and more importantly, a symbol of economic sovereignty in the Sahel. Built outside the traditional orbit of Western partnerships, the refinery represented the possibility of refining Africa's own oil, setting its own prices, and breaking free from a cycle of dependency. Satellite imagery and intercepted communications painted the threat with unnerving precision. Convoys had been assembling along the southeastern border, their coordinates aligning perfectly with the refinery. Radio metadata indicated a strike window calculated down to the hour. If carried out, the sabotage would cripple Burkina Faso's most ambitious economic project before it could even launch. The nation's spine, its chance at self-reliance, would be broken. Inside Ouagadougou, the AES Council convened in secrecy. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, three nations bound by geography and shared struggle, weighed the intelligence with gravity. Some voices urged caution, fearing escalation that could plunge the Sahel into chaos. Yet for President Traoré, the matter was not one of risk, but of principle. To him, the refinery was not just steel and concrete. It was a backbone. To allow it to be shattered would mean condemning future generations to the chains of dependency. The decision came swiftly. The convoy identified as the imminent threat would be neutralized. Thus, the drone strike was no random act of aggression, but a preemptive shield. The vehicles that burned in the midnight strike were not merchants or innocents. They were armed units, loaded with explosives, moving with a mission to destroy the refinery before its heart could beat. What stunned analysts most was not only the decision, but the weapon. The drone deployed was identified as the NA-7, a system developed quietly through collaboration with North Korea and Russia. Its capabilities were sobering: a range of nearly 800 kilometers, thermal-seeking missiles, and AI-guided navigation that allowed for surgical accuracy. Within 12 minutes from command to execution, the mission was complete. Western observers admitted something uncomfortable. Their own drones in the Sahel had often relied on satellite relays vulnerable to jamming and carried higher risks of collateral damage. By contrast, the NA-7 delivered impact with precision and no civilian casualties. Defense experts in Paris began referring to it as the clean blade of Ouagadougou. For Burkina Faso, the symbolism was immense. A country long dismissed as a pawn had demonstrated battlefield efficiency beyond the reach of traditional powers. For Africa at large, the question now spread. If one landlocked state could field such technology, what would happen if others followed? The world's reaction split sharply. In Western capitals, analysts warned of reckless provocation, fearing that the strike could embolden others. Energy investors fretted that billions in contracts could collapse if drone warfare became a new tool of resource defense. Paris called the act destabilizing, while Washington urged restraint but refrained from direct condemnation. A silence many interpreted as unease. On the streets of Ouagadougou, however, the mood was electric. Tens of thousands gathered, waving flags and chanting slogans. In Bamako and Niamey, citizens joined the chorus, seeing Traoré's decision not as recklessness, but as dignity in action. Graffiti appeared overnight. Sovereignty is not negotiable. Street vendors sold shirts emblazoned with the words, "Don't mess with sovereignty." Social media amplified the sentiment. Hashtags such as Sahel Rising and "You Don't Mess with Sovereignty" trended across the continent. TikTok videos reenacting Traoré's declaration gained millions of views, while remixes of his speech turned into anthems for a movement. Analysts later estimated that the viral wave generated an advertising value of nearly 40 million United States dollars. Proof that narrative could be as powerful as weapons. The contrast could not have been starker. In Western boardrooms, fear of instability dominated. In African streets, pride and defiance thrived. One side saw danger, the other saw liberation. And in between, the world grappled with a new reality, that a drone strike lasting just 12 minutes had cracked open the door to a multipolar future. Yet as the chants echoed and the world debated, a sharper question loomed. Would this surge of defiance hold against the storm of retaliation waiting beyond the horizon? The refinery at Kudu was more than industrial steel. It was a promise. With projections of over 400 million United States dollars in annual revenue, the facility was expected to channel resources into schools, hospitals, and technological innovation. For a nation long forced to export crude at low prices only to import refined fuel at high costs, the refinery represented freedom from a cycle of exploitation. Protecting it was not merely an act of defense. It was an act of economic sovereignty. In the immediate aftermath of the drone strike, the Burkina Faso public felt both relief and pride. Relief because the refinery, their collective investment in the future, remained untouched. Pride because their government had not folded in fear, but acted decisively against the shadows that sought to keep them dependent. Across Ouagadougou, conversations in markets and cafes turned toward possibility. What could be built if national revenues no longer bled abroad? Yet the revelations carried another consequence. They exposed uncomfortable truths about the region itself. Among the wreckage, the discovery of Nigerian military ID tags created a storm of controversy. These were not faceless mercenaries, but men who had once served in one of West Africa's largest armies. Their presence raised painful questions. Were neighboring states complicit, or had their veterans been repurposed by foreign networks beyond their control? For Nigeria, the allegations were deeply troubling. Officials denied involvement, yet the evidence suggested something more complex. A web of dependency where soldiers trained under foreign partnerships later reappeared as contractors in covert operations. This revelation did not only strain relations within West Africa, it also laid bare the mechanisms through which sovereignty was eroded from within. At home, the political impact was seismic. For years, critics had painted Traoré as too young, too bold, too inexperienced to steer a fragile state. But the strike transformed that image. Instead of recklessness, many citizens now saw resolve. The president who had risen through a coup was suddenly reframed as a leader willing to take responsibility for decisive action. In international commentary, the term Ibrahim Traoré Coup resurfaced not as a stigma, but as a marker of defiance, the moment when a nation decided to reclaim its agency. The opposition inside Burkina Faso struggled to respond. Some accused the government of endangering the nation by escalating tensions. But those arguments fell flat against the backdrop of public celebrations. When ordinary citizens carried banners declaring, "We will not bow," it was clear that the psychological terrain had shifted. The people no longer felt like passive witnesses. They felt like participants in shaping their own destiny. The strike also forced the country to confront a paradox. By defending its sovereignty so openly, Burkina Faso had invited the gaze of global powers. Sanctions, covert retaliation, and economic pressure loomed as inevitable consequences. And yet, for many, the risk was worth it. The choice was between decades more of dependency or a bold gamble for dignity. International investors reacted with caution. Energy analysts warned that billions in contracts across the Sahel might unravel if other nations adopted Burkina Faso's model of preemptive defense. Some feared a domino effect. What if Niger, Mali, or Guinea followed suit? Could foreign corporations continue extracting resources under the same terms if the Sahel bloc hardened its defenses? Inside Burkina Faso, however, the conversation was more intimate. Parents imagined schools built from refinery revenues. Farmers envisioned subsidies to improve yields. Students dreamt of scholarships funded by oil profits. The drone strike was not discussed in abstract military terms. It was framed as a choice for the next generation. Still, the questions would not fade. Who funded Operation Broken Spine? Who controlled the shadowy DC handler? And how far would entrenched powers go to punish a nation that dared to say no? The answers, many feared, would not be found in Ouagadougou alone, but in the corridors of global power where Africa's future was too often decided without its voice. The drone strike did not remain a local affair. It reverberated through chancelleries from Washington to Paris, from Brussels to Moscow. In Washington, the official statement was cautious. The United States urged restraint, emphasizing dialogue and stability. Yet behind closed doors, analysts admitted something far more unsettling. The strike had demonstrated capabilities that even Western drones in the Sahel had failed to match. For a small, landlocked nation to execute a 12-minute precision strike without collateral damage was an embarrassment that could not be ignored. Paris, by contrast, reacted sharply. French officials warned that such actions threatened regional stability and could spiral into uncontrollable conflict. French media painted Traoré as unpredictable, reckless, even dangerous, a leader playing with fire. Yet in African streets, the very same qualities were celebrated as courage, dignity, and independence. The European Union and NATO echoed France, framing the incident as the dawn of a new wave of chaos in Africa. But their words rang hollow against the images flooding social media. Videos of cheering crowds, hashtags like Washa Sahel Rising and Sovereignty Not Negotiable, and murals of drones painted as guardians of African skies told a different story. The narrative battle was underway, and for once, Africa's voice was louder. Elsewhere, new partnerships quietly deepened. Russia and North Korea were acknowledged as contributors to the NA-7 drone system. China, while more discreet, signaled support through offers of satellite data sharing and infrastructure investment. The multipolar reality was taking shape. Burkina Faso was no longer merely a recipient of aid or a battlefield for proxies. It was becoming a partner in shaping security on its own terms. The African Union found itself caught between caution and admiration. Some leaders urged distance, fearing sanctions or escalations. Others, especially within the AES bloc of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, embraced the strike as precedent, a doctrine of collective defense. Their joint communiqué declared that any attack on one member would be treated as an attack on all. It was a statement that elevated the drone strike from a single nation's gamble to a regional doctrine. This moment raised the question of a continental trajectory. Was this the first spark of a larger awakening, a step toward what some already called the Burkina Faso Revolution? Or would the combined weight of Western pressure and financial retaliation suffocate the movement before it matured? The world watched, divided, some fearing chaos, others sensing rebirth. But the Sahel itself knew the real test was yet to come. From the fire of the strike emerged a vision. It was not just about drones or a single refinery. It was about the shape of tomorrow, whether Africa would continue to be a chessboard for others or finally act as a player in its own right. In Ouagadougou, Bamako, and Niamey, leaders gathered to chart a path forward. Out of their deliberations came Operation Iron Shield. Unlike past security frameworks dictated from foreign capitals, this was African-led, African-funded, and rooted in the conviction that sovereignty could no longer be subcontracted. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger pledged to integrate intelligence, pool satellite data, and launch joint air patrols under a shared flag. Encrypted communication lines were linked into AESnet, designed to detect threats before they could strike. The declaration was simple, yet transformative. An attack on one is an attack on all. The ripple effects spread quickly. Guinea expressed interest in joining, the Central African Republic signaled alignment, and even Chad, long cautious, acknowledged that a collective defense mechanism could stabilize volatile borders. For decades, skeptics claimed that Africa could not unite militarily without external mediation. Iron Shield dismantled that argument overnight. Here were nations often portrayed as fragile, now coordinating encryption protocols, joint patrols, and data sharing at a level some NATO members struggled to achieve. On the ground, ordinary citizens gave the alliance a name of their own, Africa's First Shield. Street murals in Bamako depicted three leaders beneath a metallic barrier inscribed with the words "Sovereignty is Defense." Hackathons in Ouagadougou proposed innovations for AESnet. Musicians in Niamey released tracks celebrating what they called the Iron Shield generation. Hope, not fear, dominated the public imagination. But with pride came peril. Western think tanks quickly warned that the alliance could destabilize existing security frameworks. In other words, sideline foreign military bases and reduce the influence of external missions. Markets trembled, with energy investors calculating that 10 to 15 billion United States dollars in contracts might be renegotiated under new terms less favorable to foreign firms. Sanctions, cyber attacks, and covert pressure loomed on the horizon. For Africa, however, the calculus was different. The question was not whether retaliation would come, but whether unity could endure it. If Iron Shield survived, it could set a precedent not just for the Sahel, but for the continent at large. A doctrine where dignity was not an aspiration, but a practice. The storm was gathering, but so was resolve. The night of the drone strike had changed more than tactics. It had changed the very doctrine of survival. The night sky over Burkina Faso burned for only 12 minutes, yet the echoes of that moment may shape decades. What began as a drone strike against a single convoy became a declaration of intent, a line drawn not on maps, but in the collective will of a people. For the first time in generations, Africa was not merely reacting to history. It was making it. President Ibrahim Traoré, stood before his citizens and the world to confirm what few expected, that the order had come from him. It was an act that startled Western capitals, unsettled financial markets, and inspired millions across the Sahel. No longer was Burkina Faso a pawn. With courage and conviction, it had proven that sovereignty could be defended with action, not only with words. In that moment, the Ibrahim Traoré Coup was not remembered as an accident of power, but as a pivot of dignity, the beginning of a doctrine that refused submission. The refinery at Kudu remains standing, more than steel, more than profit. It has become a symbol of resistance, a promise of education, healthcare, and technology for future generations. And the strike itself has become a story retold across markets, universities, and households. That a land once dismissed as fragile had chosen to fight for its right to stand upright. But the Burkina Faso revolution does not end with a single act of defiance. The question now is whether the unity of the Sahel can endure the storms to come. Sanctions, covert sabotage, and the relentless pushback of entrenched powers. If this new doctrine holds, Africa will not only shield its resources, but redefine its place in the 21st century. The world may call it reckless. The people call it pride, and history will remember it as a turning point. If this resonates with your sense of justice, share this message, comment below, and subscribe to walk with us into the story of a continent rising.